Hello YouTube and welcome to the next route learning video. On today's video we're going to be taking another look at the DP simulation East Coast Mainline Northeast extension, and we're going to be driving a class 142 pacer between Middlesbrough and Newcastle, which is a distance of just under 51 miles. Along the way we will be calling at Thornaby, Eaglescliffe, Allens West, Dinsdale, Darlington, Durham, Chesterley Street and finally Newcastle. The scenario that I'm using for this journey is one that I've custom made specifically for this video, following the real life timetable of train 2 Alpha 54, which is the 7:25 Saltburn to Newcastle service, departing Middlesbrough at 7:49. The Class 142 Pacer is both loved and hated by rail enthusiasts, probably in equal measure. It's very much the Marmite of trains. My personal opinion is that it's okay, it's certainly not my favourite, but the model in Train Simulator is really nice and it's really good to drive. So the Class 142 was constructed between 1985 and 1987 by Brell Derby and Leyland Bus, with a total of 96 of these trains built. A total of 94 are still in service. They're all supposed to come out of service by the year 2020, and there are 2 coaches per train. Interestingly, if you look at the wheels here, instead of having bogies, there are only 4 wheels per coach rather than 8. This certainly makes the ride more interesting because it makes the train a lot bouncier when travelling along. The maximum speed of these trains is 75 miles per hour, with the weight of each unit being 48.23 tonnes and a power output of 225 horsepower. Once in the cab of the Class 142, I now need to move the reversing handle into the forward position. The reversing handle is down here, and then reset the AWS self-test sequence. Now that I've done that, I'd just like to quickly go through the cab controls, just to point out first I've already manually set the destination display with the F8 key, and I've also put the headlights on, as both would already be on in reality, as this isn't the starting station for the train on this journey. In front of us here is a standard West Code 3-step brake, and then just up here you can see to the right of the screen there now the brake gauge. So if I now move the brake handle, you can see the needle moving down, and that means I've moved the handle towards the released position. So as you release the brakes, the needle will fall towards 0, and as you apply them into step 3 there, which is full service, you can see above that there is one more setting, which is emergency, which we're certainly not going to use on the journey today. In fact, I'm going to try and not go above step 2 braking at any point on this journey. Now here I need to turn on the instrument panel light and also the destination light, as I realise that they aren't already on. And continuing to move across the panel here, in front of us now we have the speedometer. As already mentioned, the maximum speed of this train is 75 miles per hour, and that certainly makes for a very bouncy ride when we're travelling along at that speed on the East Coast Mainline. Just in front of us here we have the AWS reset button, and then to the right of that we have the horn, which is a 2-tone horn operated with the space and the B key. And now just to the right of that down here we have the power handle, which is a 7-step power handle. It's actually quite easy to maintain 75 miles per hour in this train, or close to it, if we just go down by 1 step from full power to step 6 power. And that will hold the train at around 74.5 miles per hour, and the train won't accelerate anymore unless we're on a downhill section. Now the next thing I'm going to do is open the windows, which, as I'm sure you're all aware now, I love opening the windows, especially on the Pacer, as you can really hear the engine noises far more clearly than you would be able to otherwise. And as you can see, the signal ahead is clear, so I'm now going to turn off the driver reminder appliance, as we will be cleared to start very shortly. So now we've had a quick look around the cab, it is pretty much time to depart. Departing Middlesbrough, the starting speed limit is 25 miles per hour, and we've got 3¼ miles to go to our first stop, which is Thornaby. As we now reach 25 miles per hour, I'm shutting off the power to allow the train to coast until we can accelerate further. There is a 60 mile per hour speed board coming up just here, with the speed limit immediately dropping again down to 45 miles per hour. I'm not quite sure why those two speed boards are so close together like that, but certainly there's no chance we'd even get to 45 before we've got to slow down again. As you can see, we've now entered the 45 speed zone, so that speed limit didn't affect us at all. There will be a second increase in the speed limit to 60 miles per hour coming up shortly. However, that's just 1/4 mile from a further reduction back down to 45 miles per hour, so there's absolutely no point in accelerating or going above 45 along here at this point. You may have noticed here that I've actually been able to turn up the graphics settings a bit, compared to the last video on the new Chicago racetrack routes, where I had to crank the graphics down. As I was turning them back up, I thought I'd try and put them a bit higher, as I thought this route would be pretty smooth, and indeed it has proved to be. And you can see just how much clearer the shadows are now, especially the shadows in the cab, whereas previously they were a lot more blurry. Of course, I do have to remember to adjust the graphics settings again for some of the more demanding routes which are out there. So we just passed the 60 speed board, and now we're back under a 45 speed limit once again. So I'm allowing the train to coast at present, and we're doing around 43 miles per hour. I will give us a little bit of power in a moment if I need to, but I know that the timetable for this journey is quite lax, so there's a good chance we're going to arrive early at all of our stops. The speed limit here is now going up to 55 miles per hour. As the pacer is so short, we don't really have to worry too much about the back of the train being clear of the board, because by the time you've increased the power and the train has started accelerating, the whole train should have already passed the speed boards. The speed limit will be going up further in a moment to 60 miles per hour, and as the speed limit increases to 60, we're then 3/4 mile from the next speed change, which is a reduction in the speed limit back down to 50 miles per hour. So as you can see, the speed limit has now gone up to 60. I'm going to remain in full power for a moment and continue to accelerate. I'm going to start braking for the upcoming 50 speed restriction around the area of the next overbridge that we're going to pass under. So just before we pass under that overbridge, I'll ensure that we've slowed down in time for the 50 mile per hour speed limit. And as we pass the 50 mile per hour speed board, we've then got 1/3 mile to go to a further speed reduction down to 35 miles per hour. So at this point I'm now going to idle the power, and I'm preparing to brake in a moment. So I'm now braking for the 50 speed limit, and we're down to 50 now, with the 35 mile per hour speed limit coming up shortly. So as a result, I've just chosen to leave the brakes in step 1 to continue to brake and slow down at a slow speed. The 35 warning that we've just passed is 1/4 mile from the actual speed limit itself, so we're going to slow down slightly on the early side. And now we're doing 35, I've released the brakes, and I'm allowing the train to coast. You can now see the 35 board just coming up here, and we've got just under 1/2 mile to go to our stop at Thornaby. We're going to be rounding a rather sharp left curve in a moment, and then we're going to see the platform at Thornaby as we round this curve. I believe it's an island platform here, and we need to aim to stop next to the building in the platform, which I believe is the right place to stop. It's difficult to judge in such a short train, especially when there are no actual markers saying where you need to stop for various train lengths, so there is a bit of guesswork involved. But just looking at it when practicing driving this journey, I felt that next to the building seems about the right place. And so we should now be stopping in about the right place. Departing Thornaby, the starting speed limit is 35 miles per hour, and we've got around 3 miles to go to the next stop, which is Eaglescliffe. So we're now going to accelerate up to 35 miles per hour, and then once we reach 35, I'm going to shut off the power and allow the train to coast until we can accelerate further. The next speed change will be an increase in the speed limit to 45 miles per hour, which will be coming up shortly. But now that we're doing 35, I have just shut off the power, and I'm now allowing the train to coast. We're now passing the 45 speed board, so at this point I'm now going into full power to accelerate up towards 45 miles per hour. The speed limit will shortly then be increasing further to 50 miles per hour. Just passed through a short tunnel at this point. I'm not sure what the name of the tunnel is, but I'll see if I can find out and add it to the captions of this video. If not, I do apologise. So I'm just reducing the power for a moment, just as we're approaching the 50 speed board as we've reached 45, just to ensure we didn't break the speed limit. And now I'm going back up to full power to accelerate towards 50 miles per hour. And then once we reach 50, we need to go between notches 3 and 4 power to try and maintain the speed. So we're currently in notch 3 power, and as you can see we're holding it around 50, though we are slowing down slightly, so I will increase the notch 4 if we lose too much speed along here. The speed limit here is now going up to 60 miles per hour, and at this point we've got just under 1.5 miles to go to Eaglescliffe station. What I'm looking out for now is the second signal after the 60 mile per hour speed board. So this is the first signal, and then the next signal, the second signal, is where I'm going to idle the power. In fact, this signal should be displaying a cautionary aspect as we are turning off this route just after Eaglescliffe station. So that signals around half a mile to go to Eaglescliffe, and then I'm going to apply the brakes shortly after that signal as we reach some buffer stops on the right hand side. So we're now reaching the signal and we're doing 60 miles per hour, so I'm just cutting the power back to idle at this point and looking out for the buffer stops, which you can see, which is the red structure coming up just on the right there. So at this point I'm now going to start applying the brakes, initially a step 1 brake application, though you can see the station now coming up. I will go up to step 2 in a moment as required. In fact, I'm going to do that now, just to ensure that I'm bringing our speed off quick enough before pulling back to step 1 again as we get closer to the platform. Here at Eaglescliffe we do need to stop close to the end of the platform, just before a fence, which you can see just coming up. As you can see, we now have a feather indicator on the signal at the end of the platform, indicating that we are turning off this route onto the route towards Darlington. This should be about the right place to stop. Departing from Eaglescliffe, the starting speed limit here is 60 miles per hour, though it's going immediately down to 30 on the point just here. At this point we've got 2/3 of a mile to go to our stop. You may have noticed that just as I was starting there, I deactivated the driver reminder appliance, and that's because I'd activated it as we'd had some cautionary signals before the station, and I believe it's mandatory whenever you've had a cautionary signal to do that and activate the driver reminder appliance to prevent the train from being able to move without you being reminded that you're travelling under cautionary signals. So now we're doing 30 miles per hour. I've idled the power and allowed the train to coast. The speed limit here is now going up to 45, however there's absolutely no way or no point in accelerating to that before we have to slow down for our stop. So I'm going up to full power to bring our speed up slightly, but I am going to idle the power at around 35 miles per hour. You can now see the platform at Allen's West coming up. So I've now shut off the power and I'm going to apply the brakes in a moment. So I'm now braking in step 2 to bring our speed down. I want to enter the platform fairly slowly as we have to stop much closer to this end of the platform. Indeed, you can see the shelter on the left there. And I'm aiming to stop just a little bit beyond the shelter here. So there we are, we've got the second lamppost there after the shelter's just come up on the left, and this should be about the right place. Departing Allen's West, the starting speed limit is 45 miles per hour, and we've got around 4 1/3 miles to go to the next stop, which is Dinsdale. As you can see, the speed limit here is now going up to 60 miles per hour. However, we've only got just under half a mile to go to the next speed change, which is a reduction to 50 miles per hour. So along here we're not going to be exceeding 50 miles per hour before we enter the 50 speed zone. Once we reach 50, I'm then going to idle and allow the train to coast until we can accelerate further with a speed change back up to 60 miles per hour shortly afterwards. As you can see, we are now entering the 50 speed zone. We've entered it at around 46 miles per hour. I'm now cutting the power back to idle, just to make sure that we don't go over the speed limits. I believe the speed board you can see coming up just ahead now is for the speed reduction back up, speed increase back up to 60 miles per hour once again. So yep, we're now back up to 60 and I've gone straight back up to full power. I'd just like to say at this point, I have now started working on the script for my next train guide video. I know it's been a while since the last train guide, which was in the Class 60. So I've now started writing the script for a train guide for the Class 50. I decided I wanted to do another older BR loco, and one which hasn't featured in any of my videos yet. So it will indeed be on the Class 50 for the next train guide. As I head towards starting university next month, I'm trying to get some sort of semblance of a schedule together. Once I've got the timetable, I will know better what I'm doing. But I'm going to have the target of 3 videos a week. It may not always be achievable, but that's going to be the target, with 2 of them being routes learning videos, and the other being a video from another series, be it a train guide, a routes guide, a tutorial of some kind, just to try and mix it up and add a bit more variety to the channel. So that's what I'm hoping to start from next month. I'd also like to say that I am still going to be doing live streaming, but I put it back a little bit, mainly due to confidence issues myself, being sure that I know what I'm doing and that I'm confident in doing it. It's been quite a big thing for me just to run this channel, let alone be broadcasting live to people, which is something I'm still feeling quite nervous about, so I'm hoping to be streaming within the next few weeks, and I would definitely like to try and do the first stream before I start university. So we've just passed through Teesside Airport Station, which is one of the least used stations in the country. I believe it only gets like 1 or 2 trains a week, and they're only at weekends. So it's a station that's only really used by what's known as parliamentary trains, which are trains that are there and purely to keep the line or keep a particular station open, but really aren't used much by people at all. We've now got a warning for a drop in the speed limit down to 30 miles per hour. And I'm going to apply the brakes for that speed limit on the next AWS ramp just coming up. So I'm now braking for the upcoming 30 speed limit. I believe we can see the speed board coming up just ahead. So we're braking about right. In fact, now we're going to slow down slightly too early, I reckon. So I've just reduced the braking to step 1 momentarily. We're currently down to 35 miles per hour. I'm just going to increase and off, and we're just below 30 as we enter the 30 zone. At this point, I'm now just going to allow the train to continue to coast towards Dinsdale station. The speed limit will be going up to 60 miles per hour just before our stop. So we're not going to accelerate once we've passed the 60 speed board. We're just going to continue to coast into Dinsdale station. We've probably lost a little bit too much speed there. I'm just giving us a small amount of power now, just to bring the speed back up towards 30 momentarily. Now I'm going to shut off power as we pass the 60 board, so you can see the speed limit has now gone back up, and you can now see Dinsdale station just coming up here. So I'm now going to start using light braking to bring our speed down. I'm aiming to stop just before an information board, which you will see on the left hand side here. It should be coming up in a moment. I believe it's just after the platform, or should I say passenger information screen you can see there. Yep, there's the information board. And so this should be about the right place to stop. Departing from Dinsdale, the starting speed limit is 60 miles per hour, and we've got just under 4 miles to go to the next stop, which is Darlington. So on departure from Dinsdale, I'm just going to stay in full power and accelerate us straight up to 60 miles per hour. And then once we reach 60, I'm going to idle the power and allow the train to coast until we get the next speed limit warning, which will be a warning for a reduction in the speed limit down to 40 miles per hour. And that warning is 2/3 of a mile from the speed limit itself. As you can see, it certainly takes quite a while for the pacer to accelerate. I'd say it's easily taken a good 2 minutes to get up to 60 miles per hour. And as we're now doing 60, I'm going to shut off the power at this point and allow the train to coast, keeping an eye out for the upcoming warning for a 40 mile per hour speed restriction. This could be the warning just coming up on the left hand side now. Indeed it is, 20 over 40, so we've got 2/3 of a mile to go to the 40 limit itself. And I'm going to brake for the 40 limit around the area of this overbridge just coming up. So just before this overbridge, I'm then going to apply the brakes. Slowed down just slightly more there than I needed to. In fact, we're doing around 37 miles per hour now. As you can see, we've now entered the 40 mile per hour speed zone. However, the speed limit will soon be going down to 35 miles per hour. But before that, it's going to go up to 60. However, there's no point in accelerating. Also, as we have a single yellow signal at this point, that is warning us that the signal guarding the East Coast main line is currently displaying a red aspect, which means I do need to drive with caution to ensure that I don't go through any red signals. So I'm allowing the train to coast at this point. I believe that the 35 mile per hour speed board's coming up just ahead. I'm going to brake a little before that, lightly, just to try and continue to bring our speed down in time for the red signal which is coming up. Unless the signal changes, of course, before we get to it, in which case we then won't need to stop there. I do know on this curve signal visibility isn't that great, so I've got to be extra careful when approaching the signal coming up. I believe this may well be the AWS ramp for the signal. Indeed it is, and you can see the red signal coming up just ahead. So I'm just applying the brakes lightly to lightly bring our speed down. And then we'll have to wait at this signal until the East Coast main line is clear. So just departing from this signal here, the speed limit is still 35 miles per hour. As you probably saw, it was a Voyager which was blocking the route there. And once the Voyager had cleared, then our signal jumped to green. The speed limit here is now dropping to 30 miles per hour. That being said, I'm going to idle the power in a moment and brake slightly more. Even though the speed limit going into Darlington is 30 miles per hour, the points and curves just seem too sharp for that speed. So I'm actually going to slow to closer to 20 miles per hour now. Which we're now doing just because the points just seem a bit more like they would be 20 mile per hour than 30 mile per hour points. In fact, the speed limit's going up as high as 35 here as we cross this point, but again, I would not want to go around this curve at 35 miles per hour. I feel it would just throw the passengers out. So 20 miles per hour is a good speed to coast into Darlington station. Now, there's a very long platform here at Darlington, so I had to try and work out the best stopping point. I wasn't 100% certain, but to me it looks like we'll be stopping just in front of Costa Coffee. You can now see Costa Coffee coming up on the right hand side there, so I've got to wait until that appears in the middle window before we have the correct stopping point. I did see an entrance to the station is also just along here, which is another reason why I chose the area around Costa Coffee, because we're right near the ticket barriers there. And so this appears to me to be about the right place. Departing Darlington, the starting speed limit is 35 miles per hour and then quickly going up to 50 miles per hour. And we've got just under 22 miles to go to our next stop, which is Durham. So this is the longest section between stops on the journey. And as our maximum permitted speed is 75 miles per hour, there are absolutely no speed changes to affect us between here and Durham, right up until just before we arrive at Durham station. So the speed limit's already gone up to 50 miles per hour, meaning that I've left the train in full power to accelerate up towards that. Shortly after rejoining the East Coast Main Line, which we're going to in a second, on a point to the right just here. The speed limit will then be going up to 125 miles per hour, a speed that is most certainly not achievable by this train. And certainly if you've ever been on a pacer and you know how bouncy they are, I think you'd understand you would not want to travel at 125 miles per hour in a pacer. So the speed limit is now 125, so I'm just continuing to accelerate at this point. Once we reach around 75 miles per hour, as I mentioned at the start, I'm then just going to cut the power down by 1 notch. And that will hold us at just below 75, around 74.5 miles per hour. And it will hold us at that speed pretty much all the way to Durham. So there's really not a huge amount for us to do once we reach that speed. So just to say, I've already planned out the next route learning video. Now that I'm doing a pacer in this one, I fancied doing a sprinter in the next video, my favourite sprinter and probably my favourite of the second generation DMUs, which will be in a class 150, and we're going to be revisiting the Edinburgh to Glasgow route, covering a journey from Larbert to Glasgow Queen Street in an Armstrong Powerhouse scenario. Also that as of today, the class 4558 has now been released, so once I've managed to get hold of that, I plan on doing another journey on the South London network. And I'm also planning on doing a slow line journey from London Victoria to Brighton, a journey which has not yet been covered. I was waiting first until we got the new class 4558 so I could use that for AI in that video before I made it. And it also means I'm now happy to try and start work on the London to Brighton routes guide, though it will certainly be a while before the script for that is complete, and it may well be that I do another routes guide before I cover the London to Brighton one, just because of how time consuming I think it's going to be. So we just had an AWS warning there with a Morpeth board for a speed reduction down to 95 miles per hour. Of course, this is not going to affect us on this journey. We're now approaching the 95 mile per hour speed board, and as we pass it, we've then got 18¼ miles to go to Durham. And then the speed limit, as you saw, is shortly dropping to 85 miles per hour as well. So now we've just passed the 95 board, meaning we've got 18¼ miles to go to our next stop. As you can see, we're now doing around 75 miles per hour, so I'm cutting the power back by 1 notch now to hold us at this speed. As you can see, when you're doing 75 miles per hour in a pacer, you certainly get a pretty good appearance of speed, especially with the bounce that you get on this train, and yeah, it really does look like you're actually doing 75. That's one of the things in train sim I'm not such a fan of, is with the trains, particularly when you're sat higher up and further away from the track, that the appearance of speed can actually be quite low, even when you're going quite fast, versus trains with more bounce which are closer to the ground. For example, the Class 101 DMU, with the Class 101 that's so close to the ground that when you're doing 70 in that, it looks more like you're doing 100 in some other trains, if not faster. So I noticed a couple of days ago Dovetail Games announced another new route, which is the New Jersey Transit route. That's something I'm actually very interested in getting hold of and covering in a future video. However, because it involves New York, I believe, I am concerned about frame rates, a bit like with the Northeast Corridor New York to New Haven section. So it may well be, if it comes out before I get my PC upgrade next month, but I won't actually be covering it until after I've upgraded the PC, so that we can hopefully get a much smoother performance for better quality videos on that route. What I'm looking out for along here now is a speedboard which says 110 on it. Once we reach this 110 mile per hour speed limit, we've then got around 11 miles to go to Durham. We're now passing a Northern Rail Class 158, which is unfortunately what I've had to use as an alternative to the Transpennine Express. I believe it would be Class 185 travelling along here. As we don't currently have a Class 185, I wasn't sure what to add, so I decided to add Northern Rail Northern Rail Class 158s travelling along here instead, though I think that may be the only Transpennine Express service which was scheduled to pass us in the timetable. You probably just noticed there we had a warning for an upcoming 110 mile per hour speed limit, which is the speed limit I mentioned a few moments ago. And so we're now approaching the 110 speedboard, meaning that we now have 11 miles to go to Durham station. We're now passing Ferry Hill South Junction with Ferry Hill sidings coming on the right hand side now, and we've just passed a 120 mile per hour speedboard. So if we were in an HST Voyager or Class 91 travelling along here, we would be able to accelerate to 120 miles per hour at this point. We're now passing Tursdale Junction with 7¼ miles to go to Durham. Morpeth board just there was for a reduction to 100 miles per hour, which of course won't affect us. What I'm looking out for along here now is actually a 90 mile per hour speed board. Once we pass the 90 mile per hour speed board, we've then got 4 miles to go to Durham. We now have a warning for the upcoming 90 mile per hour speed limit which I mentioned, so I'm just looking out for the board now. At this point we've just started going up on a 1 in 150 uphill gradient, causing slight deceleration at this point. And we've now got 4 miles to go as we're passing the 90 mile per hour speed board. What I'm looking out for next is a flashing double yellow diverging route aspect. At that point we've got 2 3/4 miles to go to Durham, and the signal is indicating that we've got to turn off the East Coast Main Line to enter the platform on this side. Certainly if you're going in the up direction towards London, and I believe the main track goes straight through the platform. But if you're going in the down direction away from London, you actually have to turn off the main track to enter the platform in this direction. We've now got the flashing double yellow signal. I don't actually need to respond at this point, but that is an indication that we are now getting closer to Durham. You may have noticed we've lost a little bit of speed there due to the uphill gradient that we've been on, but I believe the gradient has now levelled out slightly and we're slowly starting to gain speed back towards 75 miles per hour. So I'm now looking out for the flashing single yellow, which is then 1 mile from the following signal, which I believe will be a solid single yellow, and the speed limit drops down to 40 miles per hour just after that signal, just before we enter Durham station. So you may have noticed there we just had an AWS warning for an 80 mile per hour Morpeth board, which doesn't affect us, so we can ignore that warning at this time. You can now see the flashing single yellow coming up just to our right. I'm going to idle the power as we pass that signal. As I mentioned, it is then 1 mile to the next signal, so idling the power at this point seems appropriate. And then going to brake lightly very shortly. I believe it may be at the next overbridge, and increase the braking as we get closer to the next signal. So we've now got the next overbridge coming up just ahead, which is a rather large and taller overbridge, and that's the landmark I'm using for the braking point to start bringing our speed down. And now increasing our braking as we are now approaching the next signal. And I want to ensure that we're down to 40 miles per hour in time, which we certainly will be now. I'm just reducing the braking back a bit. We're now doing 45. Speed limit goes down to 40 as we cross the point to the left hand side immediately before the platform, Indeed, you can see the platform on the other side just coming up, which indicates we are now approaching Durham station. I'm aiming to stop here just beyond the ticket barrier and platform sign that is near that. So just past the ticket barrier now, and there's the platform sign, so we should now be stopped in about the right place. Departing Durham, the starting speed limit is 40 miles per hour, and we've got around 5 3/4 miles to go to the next stop, which is Chester Le Street. Just after we rejoin the main line in a moment, as we turn to the right, the speed limit will then be going up to 90 miles per hour, which of course again means 75 miles per hour for us. And there are no speed limit changes between Durham and Chester Le Street, which will affect us. So we've now crossed onto the East Coast Main Line. The speed limit has now gone up to 90 miles per hour. As you saw, we hadn't quite reached the previous 40 mile per hour speed limit at that point, so I was just able to stay in full power and continue to accelerate. We will be able to get up to 75 miles per hour on this journey between Durham and Chester Le Street before we need to slow down for our stop. The next landmark that I'm actually looking out for is a 115 mile per hour speedboard. Once we reach that speedboard, we've then got around 3.5 miles to go to Chester Le Street station. We're now passing the 115 mile per hour speedboard which I mentioned, so we've now got 3.5 miles to go to our next stop. What I'm now looking out for is the next overbridge that we pass under. As we pass under that overbridge, we've then got 1 3/4 miles to go. So I believe this is the overbridge just coming up now. And I've just cut the power back by 1 notch just to ensure that we don't break the speed limit at any point. What I'm looking out for now is the next underbridge that we pass over, and that indicates that we've got just over a mile to go. I'm going to idle the power at that underbridge, and then I'm going to aim to apply the brakes on the next AWS ramp. So this is the underbridge just now, which I mentioned. At this point I'm now idling the power. I'm looking out for the next signal, ready to apply the brakes on the next AWS ramp between steps 1 and 2. So that's the AWS ramp there, making an initial step 2 brake application, reducing to step 1 as required. You can now see the platform at Chesterley Street Station just coming up. So here at Chesterley Street, I'm aiming to try and stop just before the footbridge. Departing Chesterley Street, the starting speed limit is 115 miles per hour for faster trains and 75 miles per hour for us. And we've got around 8 1/4 miles to go to our next and final stop, which is Newcastle. Again, there are no speed changes which affect us until we actually get a lot closer to Newcastle itself. And then as we get into Newcastle, the speed limits gradually step down, and there's a good chance that we will get cautionary or red signals approaching Newcastle station. One of the things you may have noticed with this journey is that I've chosen autumn as the season, and I've also chosen another early morning service, and the reason for that is just the lighting effects I think look really awesome at this time of day. So my favourite time of day, you may have noticed from my videos, is either morning or evening, dawn or dusk, for the lighting effects in the game. So for this journey I chose a morning service, as it's one of the few scheduled services that goes all the way through from Middlesbrough to Newcastle. And I chose autumn as the season because the light levels work best at this time of day. And I also love the colours on the trees and the way that the light levels affect that. Of course, this mainly applies to the use of the Armstrong Powerhouse lighting enhancement pack, which works on the majority of British routes and some routes from other countries. But unfortunately, from what I understand, it doesn't work properly with 3D skies, so you have to use the older 2D skies. which is fine for me because I do think that the new 3D skies affect frame rates more than they warrant for the graphical improvements that they give. And so it's annoying that on some routes, such as Northeast Corridor, New York to New Haven, you have to have the 3D sky turned on for all of the textures to display properly. On a route which is already bad for frame rates, having to use 3D skies just makes things a whole lot worse. I believe that we are now passing Birtsley Junction. In a short while we'll start to see the first of several speed limit reductions as we head towards Newcastle. As you can see, I've reduced the power to notch 6 just to ensure that we don't break the speed limit, once again holding us at just below 75 miles per hour. So the first warning of a speed change is a Morpeth board for a 100 mile per hour speed restriction. We can ignore the Morpeth board. And then shortly after that we've then got a warning for an upcoming 30 mile per hour speed limit. However, that warning is well spaced from the speed limit itself, being over 1.5 miles apart. So once again we don't actually need to respond to that quickly. And as we reach the actual 100 mile per hour speed board, then at that point I'm going to idle the power, as the speed limit will soon be falling to 70 miles per hour. And so if we idle the power at the 100 speed board, that should allow the train to coast down to 70 about right. Then once we reach 70 miles per hour, or should I say once we reach the 70 limit, we've then got half a mile to go to the upcoming 30 mile per hour speed limit. So here's the warning for the speed reduction to 100 miles per hour, quickly followed by the warning for the speed reduction to 30 miles per hour. As mentioned, I don't need to do anything at this point. I'm now looking out for the 100 mile per hour speed board just ahead, ready to idle the power and allow the train to start coasting down towards 70. So there's the 100 speed board. I've now idled the power and I am allowing the train to coast. The next indication we're getting closer to the 70 speed board is an 80 speed board just coming up. The 80 speed board is a quarter of a mile from the 70 board. So here's the 80 mile per hour speed board. As you can see, we've coasted down to around 70 miles per hour now. The 70 board is just coming up, and as I said, it is half a mile from the 30 speed limit. I'm going to start applying the brakes as we approach this signal just here, which is currently displaying a double yellow, meaning that we are not cleared all of the way into Newcastle station. I do apologise for the lag that we're getting a little bit as we're approaching Newcastle. Now it is a bit more of a built up area, but I wasn't getting the same lag when practicing this journey. This seems to be more something that's happening when recording. The speed limit's now down to 30. I've released the brakes at just below 30 miles per hour, bearing in mind that we are running under cautionary signals, so I do need to keep an eye on the next signal aspect to see what's happening. And I'm allowing the train to coast at this point, as I don't feel that we need any power to maintain speed. So we've now reached a single yellow signal. I've now applied the brakes lightly to continue to bring our speed down. The next signal is displaying a red aspect, and it's certainly not far away. Just increase the braking slightly for a moment there, just to help bring our speed down. And you can now see the red signal just here on the bridge across the River Tyne, which you can see below us. Due to the laxity in the timetable, we are running slightly early. There is a Class 91 due out, which is blocking our path at present. In addition to that, I've also made a slightly delayed service to Newcastle, to Carlisle from here, which is also going to depart before we will be cleared into Newcastle station. So once we stop at this signal, I'll pan to some outside shots of the other trains passing before jumping back into the cab for the short journey into Newcastle station. Now that the signal has cleared, you can see a number 6 above the signal, indicating that we are cleared into platform 6 at Newcastle. And the speed limit here is dropping to 15 miles per hour once we've crossed these points, or should I say once we start crossing these points to the right. And so now we're doing 15, I'm shutting off the power and I'm allowing the train to coast. That looks like we may be just slightly there over, may have hit 16 miles per hour for a second. I'm now going to allow the train to continue to coast at 15 miles per hour. The speed limit will shortly be going up to 20, but I see very little point in accelerating as we are now approaching Newcastle station just around this rather sharp right-hand curve. You can see here where the speed limit is 20 miles per hour. And you can now see one of the platforms at Newcastle just coming up. In the platform where we're stopping, we need to stop before the first signal in the platform, or else it will tell me that the scenario was a failure, something I unfortunately learned the hard way when practicing this journey. So I'm going to aim to stop by the first signal in the platform, which I believe will be displaying a single yellow aspect. I've just braked lightly to bring our speed down towards 10 miles per hour, so it will be a lot easier to stop. I'm not sure exactly where the signal is with the visibility ahead, so I am keeping a close eye out for it. In fact, you can now see the signal just coming up on the left-hand side there with the single yellow aspect on it. And if we stop before there, we should be stopped in about the right place. And so here we are, arrival at Newcastle. Thank you very, very much for watching. I really do hope that you have enjoyed this video. Please don't forget that you can find me on Facebook for the latest updates, the link of which is in the description of this video. And if you value the work that I do and would like to sponsor me towards the cost of new equipment and future projects, then please visit my Patreon page for further information. Again, the link for that is in the description of the video. Once again, thank you for watching.